There are moments when revenge stops being about justice and begins to resemble something far more dangerous, something corrosive, something that consumes not only the target but the one who dares to carry it out. And what unfolds inside that sealed room is not merely a confrontation but the culmination of years of manipulation, resentment, and buried trauma finally clawing its way to the surface, refusing to be silenced any longer. It is no longer a question of who is right or wrong, but of who is willing to go further, who is willing to sacrifice more, who is willing to lose everything in order to win a game that may never have had a fair outcome to begin with. Phyllis feels that shift long before she acknowledges it, long before she allows herself to name it, because instinctively she understands when a situation begins to slip beyond calculation, when the variables multiply beyond control, when the outcome can no longer be predicted with the precision she prides herself on. And yet she pushes forward anyway, because retreat would mean accepting defeat, accepting that Victor remains untouchable, that the past remains buried, that Diane's suffering, and by extension her own need to expose the truth, would once again be dismissed as collateral damage in Victor's empire of control. That is something Phyllis refuses to accept, not because she trusts Diane, but because she cannot tolerate the idea of Victor winning yet again. Diane, however, is operating from a different emotional core, one that is far more volatile, far more personal, because this is not simply about exposing Victor, it is about reclaiming herself, about rewriting a narrative that was stolen from her, about proving that she is no longer the woman who can be erased, manipulated, or discarded. Every step she takes in this plan is fueled by that need, by the desperate, burning desire to stand in front of Victor and force him to acknowledge what he did, to see him stripped of his certainty, his control, his intouchable aura. But what Diane fails to fully grasp is that confronting Victor does not diminish him, it activates him, it sharpens him, it draws him into a state where he is most dangerous because he does not react emotionally in the way others do. He calculates, he adapts, and most importantly, he anticipates. As the confession unfolds, the weight of it lands differently on each of them, like a ripple that fractures into multiple directions, each carrying its own consequence, its own emotional fallout. Victor's admission is not explosive, not chaotic, but chillingly composed, delivered with the kind of clarity that suggests he has already processed the moral implications long ago and found them irrelevant. He does not deny what he did, does not attempt to soften it, because in his mind, it was never about morality. It was about control, about protecting his legacy, about eliminating a perceived threat with the efficiency that has defined his entire life. But even Victor cannot fully escape the unintended consequence of that decision, the innocent life that was lost. And while he does not express regret in the way others might expect, there is a subtle shift, a flicker of acknowledgement that even his control has limits, that even he is not immune to the chaos that follows when power is exercised without restraint. That revelation devastates Diane in ways she did not anticipate, because it forces her to confront the complexity of her own anger, to question whether the justice she seeks can ever truly compensate for the damage that has already been done. The narrative she has built in her mind, one where she is the victim reclaiming her power, begins to crack under the weight of that truth, because now the story includes someone who had nothing to do with their conflict, someone who paid the ultimate price for a war they were never part of. And in that moment, Diane is no longer certain where justice ends and vengeance begins. Phyllis, meanwhile, reacts with a different kind of intensity, one that is less about the past and more about the present, about what can still be salvaged, what can still be controlled, what can still be turned into an advantage. She sees the confession not as an ending but as a tool, something that can still be leveraged, something that can still be used to bring Victor down in a way that finally sticks. But even as she begins to formulate her next move, she cannot ignore the shift in Victor's demeanor, the subtle but unmistakable change that signals he is no longer reacting but executing, no longer responding but advancing his own strategy. When Victor reveals that he knew about the plan all along, that he allowed it to unfold, that he walked into this situation with full awareness of what was coming, the entire structure of Phyllis and Diane's control collapses instantly, like a carefully constructed illusion shattered by a single, undeniable truth. It is not just a reversal of power, it is a complete redefinition of the game itself, because now it is clear that they were never the architects of this moment, only participants in a larger design they did not see. Diane feels the panic rise immediately, sharp and disorienting, not because she is afraid of Victor, but because she realizes she has miscalculated him, underestimated him, allowed herself to believe that she could outmaneuver someone who has spent his entire life staying several steps ahead of everyone around him. The room, once a space where she felt in control, now feels like a trap, a place where every move she makes could be anticipated, countered, neutralized. Her certainty begins to crumble, replaced by a growing awareness that she is no longer dictating the terms of this confrontation. Phyllis resists that realization longer, her mind racing, searching for an angle, for a weakness, for any indication that Victor's control is not as absolute as it appears. But even she cannot ignore the implications of his words. The quiet confidence with which he reveals that the police are already involved, that the outcome of this situation has already been set into motion. For someone like Phyllis, who thrives on control, on being the one who sees the bigger picture, this is more than a setback. It is a direct threat to her identity, to the way she understands herself and her place in the world. And it is in that moment, as the reality of their situation becomes undeniable, that the alliance between Phyllis and Diane begins to disintegrate completely, because survival becomes the only priority, and survival does not allow for shared goals or mutual understanding. Diane sees it in Phyllis's eyes, the calculation, the shift, the subtle but unmistakable willingness to prioritize herself over everything else, and that realization cuts deeper than anything Victor has done, because it confirms what Diane has always feared, that she was never truly an ally, only a temporary necessity. The tension between them becomes almost unbearable, a silent confrontation layered on top of the larger conflict, as each of them begins to reassess not only their situation, but each other, to question motives, to anticipate betrayal, to prepare for the possibility that the real danger may not be Victor, but the person standing beside them. The psychological pressure intensifies, compressing everything into a single, volatile moment where every decision carries irreversible consequences. And then the gunshot shatters everything. It is not just the sound itself, but the timing, the sudden violent interruption of a situation that had already reached its breaking point, that transforms everything from a controlled confrontation into pure chaos. For a split second, time seems to stop, as if the world itself is trying to process what has just happened, as if reality needs a moment to catch up with the magnitude of that single act. In that suspended moment, everything changes. The carefully constructed plans, the calculated strategies, the shifting alliances, all of it becomes irrelevant, because now the situation is no longer about control, but about consequence, about survival, about understanding who has crossed the final line, and what that means for everyone else involved. Phyllis feels it first, the instinctive recognition that nothing can be undone now, that whatever has just happened has altered the trajectory of everything that follows, and for the first time, there is a flicker of something unfamiliar within her, not fear exactly, but uncertainty, the realization that she may not be able to think her way out of this, that this is no longer a game that can be won through strategy alone. Diane's reaction is more immediate, more visceral, as the emotional weight of everything crashes down on her at once, the past, the present, the betrayal, the loss, all converging into a single, overwhelming realization that the path she chose has led her here, to a moment where there is no clear way forward, no easy resolution, no guarantee of survival. And Victor, even in this moment, remains an enigma, because whether he anticipated this outcome or not is impossible to determine, his expression revealing nothing, his control seemingly intact even as the situation spirals into unpredictability, leaving one final haunting question lingering in the air, not just about what has happened, but about what happens next, about who truly holds the power now, about whether this was ever a game that could be controlled at all, or whether it was always destined to end in chaos, in destruction, in a moment where no one can claim victory, only survival,